The street was quiet, almost too quiet. A thin fog rolled across the neighborhood, and the streetlights buzzed with a faint flicker. Behind the neat rows of houses, shadows moved. The HOA board had gathered, not in daylight where everyone could see them, but in the dark of night. Their whispers carried through the still air. They had a plan. A plan to take control of one man's property. They thought it would be simple. But they had chosen the wrong neighbor. Inside his home, the homeowner felt the first signs that something was wrong. It began with a letter slipped under his door late at night. No stamp, no return address, just a single sheet with bold black words. "You are in violation, fix it, or else." The next night, he checked his cameras. What he saw made his blood run cold. Shapes moved in the dark, people crouching low, shining flashlights pointing at his yard. They weren't thieves. They were his own HOA board members. Days passed, and the pressure grew stranger. Notes taped to his car windshield. Fines for things that didn't exist. Unapproved paint color, illegal plants, improper lighting. The rules seemed to change every hour, as if they were designed only for him. Then came the knock. 3 sharp taps at 3 a.m. He rushed to the door, heart pounding, but when he opened it, nothing. No one there. Only silence, thick and heavy, like the whole neighborhood was holding its breath. Sleep no longer came easy. Every creak in the house, every rustle outside, felt like someone watching. He realized this wasn't about rules or fines anymore. The HOA wasn't just enforcing regulations. They were circling, waiting, planning. From the outside, the neighborhood looked peaceful, almost perfect. But behind that perfect smile of suburbia, something ugly was brewing. A board with too much power, neighbors too afraid to speak, and a homeowner who now stood alone again.
Set them. The tension was clear. This wasn't a normal dispute. It was war, hidden in plain sight. And the HOA was about to make the one mistake they would never recover from. The stage is set. The HOA's worst mistake ever is about to begin. The nights grew longer and the tension heavier. At first, the homeowner thought the strange letters were nothing more than a mistake. But soon, the signs multiplied. One morning, he walked out to his car and froze. A bright yellow paper clung to his windshield. Violation notice, it read, bold and unforgiving. The reason? Unauthorized vehicle parked on property. But it was his car, his own driveway, his own land. He shook his head, tossed the paper aside and tried to move on. Yet the next day, another notice appeared. This one claimed his grass was too tall, even though he had cut it only 2 days earlier. The fines began stacking. $50, $100, $200. Each slip of paper carried the same sharp message. The HOA owned him. Neighbors began whispering. Some avoided eye contact. Others only gave nervous glances, as if they wanted to help, but feared the board too much. It was clear. He wasn't the first to be targeted. Then, something even stranger happened. The rules themselves seemed to change overnight. The HOA handbook had always been strict, but now new guidelines appeared, written in fresh ink, slipped into mailboxes at dawn. No fences taller than 4 feet. No gardening tools visible. No flags of any kind. And somehow, every rule pointed directly at him. His tall wooden fence, his small vegetable patch, the flag waving gently from his porch. Each detail of his home became a weapon the HOA used against him. At night, he heard footsteps outside. Gravel crunching, low whispers, beams of flashlights scanning his yard like searchlights on a prison wall. He checked the footage on his cameras. The same faces appeared again and again. The HOA board, smiling during the day, sneaking at night. The pressure was no longer subtle. It was deliberate, calculated, a slow tightening of the rope. One evening, as he carried groceries inside, he noticed another paper tape to his front door. This one was different. No fine, no warning, just 4 words written in thick black marker. "This is your last chance." His hands trembled as he peeled it away. The message was clear. The HOA wasn't just enforcing rules anymore. They were coming for him. The homeowner looked around at the neat houses, the trimmed lawns, the glowing windows. On the surface, the neighborhood looked perfect. But beneath that polished mask was fear, silence, and control. And now, all eyes were on him. The warning signs were no longer small. They were everywhere, impossible to ignore. The battle had already begun. The threats had grown too bold to ignore. The homeowner knew it was time to face them. When the notice arrived announcing the next HOA meeting, he circled the date on his calendar. He wouldn't stay in the shadows anymore. The night of the meeting, he walked into the community hall. The air inside felt heavy, like a storm about to break. Rows of folding chairs lined the room, filled with neighbors who spoke in low whispers. At the front sat the board, stiff and proud, their leader at the center, the HOA president. She was a woman with sharp eyes and a sharper smile, the kind of smile that never reached the heart. When she saw him step inside, her expression tightened. "Well," she said, voice dripping with false sweetness, "the troublemaker has finally decided to join us." Laughter rippled from the board members, but the neighbors stayed silent. The homeowner didn't reply. He walked calmly to the back row, took a seat, and pulled out his phone. He pressed record. The soft chime of the device was drowned by the president's voice. The meeting began with routine items: parking complaints, trash schedules, pool maintenance. But everyone knew the real show was coming. Finally, the president cleared her throat and leaned forward. "Now," she said, her eyes locking on him, "we must address one resident who has repeatedly violated our rules." She raised a stack of papers high, waving them for everyone to see. Unauthorized fence, illegal garden, unapproved vehicle, even a flag that breaks community standards. This behavior will not be tolerated. Gasps spread through the crowd. Some neighbors shifted uncomfortably, but no one spoke. The board smiled, feeding off the silence. The homeowner stayed still, his expression unreadable. The phone in his hand recorded every word. The president pressed harder, her voice rising with every accusation. "This is a community of order, of respect. And when one person ignores the rules, it destroys everything we've built." She turned toward him, waiting for a reaction. "Do you have anything to say for yourself?" For a moment the room was silent. Then slowly the homeowner stood. Every eye followed him. His voice was calm, steady. "I hear every word you've said," he began, "and I see every paper you've written. I've listened to the fines, the threats, the rules that change overnight. I won't argue, I won't shout. I'm here to listen." He sat back down, not another word spoken. The board shifted uneasily. They had expected anger, a fight, maybe even an outburst. But his silence was heavier than any argument. It was the silence of someone who wasn't beaten, but waiting. The neighbors glanced at one another. Something had shifted in the room. The president forced a laugh, but her eyes betrayed her unease. What no one else knew was this. The homeowner's phone had captured it all. Every insult, every false charge, every moment of arrogance. And while the board thought they had humiliated him, he had quietly set the first piece of his plan in motion. The confrontation wasn't over. It had only just begun. The board had failed to break him at the meeting. The president's smile had faltered, and the neighbors had begun to sense a shift.
But the HOA was not finished. If anything, his calm silence made them more determined. Days later, the first strike came. A letter arrived in a thick white envelope, stamped with the HOA's seal. Inside, the message was clear and cruel. Your backyard is common property. Remove all personal items within 7 days. The homeowner read it twice. His backyard? The place he had built his garden, where his children once played, where his fence stood tall. Now they were claiming it as their own. He laughed, but it was not a laugh of joy. It was the kind of laugh that came before a storm. The letters didn't stop. Each one thicker than the last, filled with legal words meant to scare. They claimed his fence was trespassing. They claimed his shed was illegal. They claimed his land was not really his at all. Soon, new envelopes appeared, this time from lawyers. Threats of lawsuits, demands for payment. Promises that if he did not obey, the HOA would take further action. But the board wasn't satisfied with paper threats. One afternoon, a knock echoed through his house. When he opened the door, 2 police officers stood on the porch. "Sir," one said, "we've had reports of unauthorized use of property." The homeowner raised an eyebrow. "From who?" The officers glanced at each other, uncomfortable. "The HOA board," one finally admitted. He stepped outside, calm as ever, and walked them to his backyard. The officers looked around, at the fence, the garden, the neat yard. Nothing was unusual. Nothing was wrong. "Looks like private property to me," one officer muttered. The homeowner smiled. "That's because it is." The officers left soon after, shaking their heads. The board had expected the police to force him into submission. Instead, the call only exposed their desperation. But still, the attacks kept coming. Each move was louder, more aggressive, more reckless. The HOA was no longer just enforcing rules, they were declaring war. And the homeowner, patient and watchful, was waiting for the perfect moment to strike back. The HOA had crossed a line, and the homeowner knew it. The false claims, the police call, the endless threats, it all pointed to something bigger than a backyard dispute. If they were this desperate to control his land, what else were they hiding? He decided to find out. Late at night, while the neighborhood slept, he opened his laptop and began digging. At first it was simple searches, property maps, county records, old meeting notes. But the deeper he went, the stranger it became. The HOA's paperwork didn't match. One map showed his yard as private property. Another, filed years later, suddenly marked it as common ground. Signatures on the documents looked wrong. Some were shaky, others repeated, as if copied. Curiosity turned into determination. He filed requests with the county office. He asked neighbors for old letters, old notices, anything they had saved. Slowly, a picture began to form. The HOA president and her board weren't just strict. They were corrupt. Money collected from fines had gone missing. Maintenance fees charged to homeowners had never been used for repairs. And worse, neighbors who spoke out in the past had quietly moved away. Too many of them. Too fast. The homeowner met one of them by chance, an older man who had once lived 2 streets over. At first, the man hesitated to talk. But when the homeowner promised to keep it off the record, the truth spilled out. "They ruined me," the man whispered. "They fined me until I couldn't keep up. They told lies to the bank, and I lost my home. They scare people into silence. Always have." The weight of those words sank deep. This wasn't about weeds, fences, or backyards. It was about power. The HOA had been using fear and lies to control the entire neighborhood. He went back through his recordings, the meeting where they mocked him, the police visit, every threat-filled letter. Piece by piece, he built a case, stronger than anything they had ever thrown at him. By the time dawn broke, he knew the truth. The HOA board had been breaking state laws for years. Fraud, forgery, extortion, all hidden behind the clean smile of community rules. This fight was no longer about his home alone. It was about every neighbor who had suffered in silence. And he would not let the board get away with it any longer. The truth weighed heavy, but the homeowner didn't let anger control him. Anger was what the HOA wanted. They wanted him to snap, to yell, to look like the villain. Instead, he chose patience. Strategy. He started with the neighbors. Quietly, one by one, he knocked on doors. At first, people hesitated. Some lowered their voices, glancing over their shoulders before speaking. But when he showed them the papers, the fake signatures, the missing money, their fear began to fade. "I thought it was only me," one whispered. "They've been doing this for years," another admitted. A spark of courage spread from house to house. Soon, he wasn't alone anymore. He built a folder, thick, organized, undeniable. Inside were copies of every notice, every fine, every strange letter. He added video clips of board members sneaking into his yard at night. He added the recording from the meeting where the president mocked him in front of everyone. Piece by piece, the HOA's mask began to crumble. But he didn't stop there. He reached out to county officials, carefully gathering public records. He saved screenshots of emails, bank statements, and fee collections. Every document told the same story: money missing, rules twisted, power abused. And while the HOA laughed at him, calling him a troublemaker, he stayed silent. He attended meetings, calm and quiet, recording every word. He let them believe he was powerless. He let them think they had won. Behind the curtain, however, his plan grew stronger every day. What the HOA didn't know was that the neighbors they once ruled through fear were now shifting sides. They were no longer whispering. They were watching, waiting, and ready. The homeowner wasn't just defending his backyard anymore. He was preparing an unstoppable counterattack that would shake the entire neighborhood. The board thought they held all the power, but soon they would realize their biggest mistake was underestimating the one man they tried hardest to break. The night of the meeting arrived. The community hall was fuller than ever before. Neighbors who usually stayed home now packed the seats, whispering nervously. Everyone had heard rumors. Everyone sensed something was about to happen. At the front, the HOA board sat stiff and confident. The president wore her usual sharp smile, certain that she still ruled the room. She rapped her gavel against the table and began with her usual tone of authority. "Tonight," she said, "we will address continued violations and disruptive behavior from one resident." But she didn't get to finish. The homeowner stood, calm and steady. In his arms, he carried a thick folder. His voice was clear, not angry, not loud, but strong enough to cut through the room. "Before you speak about me," he said, "I think the neighborhood deserves to hear the truth about you." Gasps rippled through the crowd. The president froze, her smile faltering for the first time. The homeowner stepped forward and laid the folder on the table. He opened it and began pulling out papers, copies of forged documents, bank records that showed missing money, old maps that proved the board had lied about property lines. Each page struck like a hammer. "This," he said, holding one paper high, "is the real property map. My yard has always been private, and this," he placed another page down, "is a fake version filed years later with forged signatures, signatures made by this board." The room fell silent. Neighbors leaned forward, eyes wide. He wasn't finished. From his pocket, he pulled out his phone. With a single tap, audio filled the room, the recording of the last meeting. The president's voice echoed, mocking him, calling him a troublemaker, admitting the fines were to teach him a lesson. The board shifted nervously. One man stood and tried to interrupt, but the homeowner cut him off. "Wait," he said calmly. He turned the phone again, this time showing video clips, board members sneaking into his yard at midnight, shining flashlights pointing at his fence. The crowd erupted. Gasps, shouts, whispers filled the room. Neighbors who had once been silent now spoke out. "That happened to me too," one shouted. "They fined me for nothing," another cried. The president slammed her gavel again and again, her voice sharp. "This is out of order! This meeting is out of order!" But no one listened. The board's authority had cracked. Their power was slipping through their fingers. The homeowner looked around the room. For the first time, he saw no fear in his neighbors' faces. He saw anger. He saw courage. And he knew the tide had turned. The HOA had built its empire on silence. Tonight, that silence was broken. The meeting ended in chaos. The president and her board tried to shout, tried to regain control, but their voices were drowned out by the outrage of the neighbors. The spell of fear had been broken, and once it shattered, there was no putting it back together. Within days, the fallout began. Neighbors who had once stayed silent came forward with their own stories. Letters, fines, threats. Some even had their own hidden documents, tucked away in drawers, proof of years of abuse. The homeowner gathered everything and turned it into the county. What followed was swift and unavoidable. Investigators stepped in, and the HOA's secrets could no longer be buried. Forged signatures, missing funds, illegal actions carried out under the name of community rules. The board members who had once strutted proudly through the neighborhood now kept their heads low. The president, who had ruled with a smile sharp as a knife, was suddenly quiet, her power slipping away like sand through her fingers. The neighbors changed too. For the first time in years, they looked at each other without fear. They spoke openly, laughed freely, even helped one another again. The chains that had once bound them had been broken. And at the center of it all stood the homeowner, not as a hero who shouted the loudest, but as the man who refused to be broken. He had chosen patience over rage, strategy over chaos, truth over silence. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the street was painted gold, he stood on his porch. His yard, his home, his land, all safe. Children's voices carried through the air. Neighbors waved as they passed. And for the first time in a long time, peace returned to the neighborhood. The camera drew closer, the picture sharp and still. His face calm, his stance steady. The narrator's voice closed the story with final, heavy words. They thought they could control him. But in the end, that was the HOA's worst mistake ever.